Så då har jag den. Den ser ut så här. Nu, Marcus. Marcus. Nu står det sådär, Windows och slides.
Jag tänker bara snabbt säga innan vi börjar. Jag rekommenderar er att ta platser lite längre fram. Det blir mycket roligare upplevelse för er då. Sitter ni längst bak, då är det mer för att ni vill sova. Och det är helt okej det också, men vill ni vara del av showen, då är det de här platserna som gäller. Sen är det alltid skönt att se lite film innan allt börjar.
Hej Linda. Jag vill dig runt mitt finger, Linda. Du får mina ögon blinda av din skönhet som bara jag vet. Åh, vilket nej. Jag kommer ihåg vad du sa till mig i skolan. Jag var jätteglad. Ja, det vore så kul att ses. Du kan ju svara på mejlet.
Karl-Erik! Hej!
Tjena Ronny.
Jaså, du är här ute i bland blommor och bin?
Nu har jag fixat mejl på MSN så jag sitter och mejlar till Linda.
Ja, fan vad roligt. Du,
Ja,
jag har en liten idé.
jaha, vadå?
Vad sägs om att du och jag går och pantar tonglas, va? Så
Ja.
kan vi köpa en liten drink, en liten festis.
Nej, jag skriver nog hellre mejl.
Fan vad du är tråkig. Var har du fått den där ifrån?
Jag har fått den av mamma och pappa.
Vad gör du med ditt liv? Fan vad du är misslyckad.
Tycker du?
Gillar du datorer?
Ja.
Men fy fan vad du är...
Nej.
Titta!
Vadå?
Du har tappat din plånbok där borta.
Har jag?
Jag går och hämtar för fan.
Vänta då.
Ja, ett litet brev från nimda.exe. Fan vad konstigt. Den blev alldeles... Karl-Erik, kom tillbaks! Vad är det för skitdator du har? Men fan vad dålig den är. Vad är det för epa? Vad har du för fattiga föräldrar?
Det var ingen plånbok
Det är en
där.
skitgrej för fan. Så jävla förbannad.
Vad har du gjort?
Nej, det är du. Du har ju tagit dina små gula tassar på den här. Du har ju förstört datorn. Vad är det? Du är så jävla snål.
Du har ju kört igång ett virus.
Hörru du, Karl-Erik, om du ska ha sån jävla egoistisk attityd. Då får... Fan vad roligt. Powder. Alltså, det var inte så jävla kaxig med din dator. Hörru du, jag tar den här och går hem och lagar den.
Ring sen då.
Jag har inte ditt nummer.
Vad ska jag göra nu? Mamma kommer bli så ledsen.
I think it's kind of funny. It's more than 10 years old.
Ja. Har du lagat den nu då?
Nej, det här.
That's how good it is. Well, it's kind of funny. It's more than 10 years old and it's still so current today with the viruses coming in on your desktop. It's kind of interesting. We're going to start in 1 minute, so just chit-chatting a little bit. For the newcomers, I really recommend the seats in the front. Och förresten ska vi köra på svenska, så det blir lite svengelska. Is there anyone in the audience that is not Swedish speaking? Raise your hand now, or you will suffer from Swedish language for 1 hour. One guy, seriously? My God, we'll do this just for you, man. You're welcome. Remember that for the evals later. Well, you had to suffer through this movie anyway.
Yeah.
It was actually kind of funny, yes you know.
Nimda.exe.
Okay guys, welcome to this session. It's called Cybersecurity for the Most Challenging Requirements, Part 1. And we're going to focus on protection, but there's also sequel sessions, one on detection and one on response. I think those are more harder topics than this one, because we've been talking about protection for many years. But it is still interesting that we get hacked still today, so we seriously need to still working on protection. If you never met me before, my name is Marcus Murray. I am the manager of the Trusec Cyber team. And what we basically do is we do penetration testing, red team assessments, incident response, and also security implementations for customers all around the globe. And we focus on the larger corporations, financial institutes, and government agencies and so forth. So we have a lot of hands-on experience, and we're very technical, so that's our focus area. And I have my colleague Hasain with me here today.
Hasain Alshakarti is my name. You just copy whatever Marcus said in terms of focus area and then what we do on a day-by-day basis. But I'm going to be the techie guy here, showing most of the demos, I guess.
Yeah, that's the way I like you.
Yeah.
I tell you what to do, you do what you're supposed to be doing, and then we're going to be all fine.
Yep.
Cool stuff. We've been camping together for, I don't know, 15 plus years. It only means that we're old, so it's not really something we should brag about.
It's all inside, okay?
Yeah. So anyhow, why is security important? I think if you put yourself in the clothes of the CEO at Deloitte, for example, for a second, have you ever imagined to be the CEO of Deloitte? No, but bear with me for a second. You are the CEO of one of the largest firms in the world, one of the 4 biggest firms in accounting, management consulting, cybersecurity advisory in the world. And then one day you get a phone call from your staff and they tell you that we had a breach. Every single email in the entire organization is stolen by hackers. What do? You wait. Yeah, you wait to see what happens to your future. But I think this is something that is so interesting for me when it comes to cybersecurity. It's almost like the way we worry about our homes. I mean, how often do you really think that your house is going to get burned down to the ground? You don't worry about that every day, right? Like the CEO of Deloitte didn't worry about getting all their emails stolen every day. We do have fire alarms, but not everybody really worry about it. It's like, well, I don't need that really. It's not going to burn down. There's not a big chance of that ever happening. And that's another problem with cybersecurity. You may think it's not a big chance. We're going to talk about that during the session. But when it happens, it hits you hard. And that's the message I want to send. It really hits you hard. And we see this because we work with our customers who sometimes have large intrusions. It really hits them hard. Another piece of this puzzle is they have other problems. They don't want to talk about it. But that's really a challenge when all your emails are stolen and are out on the internet. In 2012, Deloitte was named the best cybersecurity consultancy firm in the world. And they got breached. That also tells you a little bit about the challenges we're facing today. Another interesting part is what was really breached. You know? They were using Office 365 emails. And the entire security was based on the quality of the admin account password. Someone logged on as an admin into their entire email portal structure so that they could extract all the emails. And you wouldn't even be able to possibly imagine how much information is in the world, one of the 4 largest firms in the world in this area. M&A discussions, other very important discussions that is really, really confident to their clients. Another thing that's interesting to understand, this is an old breach. This is Yahoo. But only in October this year, this last month, they came clean and said, you know what, we actually had 3 billion username, password, and personal identification information stolen. 3 billion people got their credentials stolen in one breach. That's another way of looking at the impact of cybersecurity threats today. Talking about losing identification data or personal identification, these are some numbers just to give you an idea what the real cost is when it really hits you. If you are the CEO of Deloitte or someone like that, it costs hundreds of dollars per lost individual personal information. That's including everything. The reason that healthcare, for example, is more expensive than the others is because they have a lot of regulations. You will get fined. It's not just the cost from having a lost customer, if you will. It is also a bill that will be sent to you, an invoice that you will have to pay. Another trend we see is that heads are now falling because of this. If you're the CEO or the CIO or someone like that, you probably will have to look for a new job tomorrow. And it's not going to look very good on your resume either. That's the new world. You all look so happy. It's such a bring-up speech, right? Another one is Equifax. This organization was breached recently. They hold 44% of all the US citizens' data. And it all got breached. You know what? This is their actual front page today. If you surf to this organization's front page, this is what you see today. This is the impact when you get hit because you didn't buy into that fire alarm. So, what's happening? Well, cybercrime is becoming a huge industry. People are making billions of US dollars in cybercrimes. Individual organizations are making hundreds of millions of dollars in cybercrime activities. It's actually changing the world order today. And it's funny to me because it's not that transparent. Most people don't know. This industry hardly didn't even exist 10 years ago. Ransomware didn't exist 3 years ago. In the most successful ransomware wallet, we found 235 million US dollars in one wallet. So people are becoming billionaires in Swedish krona, working economics that didn't exist 3 years ago. So digitalization is interesting from many different aspects. Let's bring it closer to home. This is the desktop of a guy. His name is Christoph. He's now in the Malmö Tingsrätt for current trial. It is believed that these 8 people have worked together to break into between 600 and 700 companies and organizations in the last 1.5 years. And if you read the entire protocol, the entire documentation about this case, which is limited only to really go for accusing them of breaking into 40 companies because it's such a great job to actually make all the work you need to do in order to bring them to trial for 600-700 intrusions. So you have to limit it. But when you look at it, 8 guys managed to break into 600-700 companies. Can you imagine the work you would need to do in order to make that happen in the physical world? You'd have to break into 2-3 companies a day. That's hard work. You know what these guys did? They sent emails. That's basically all they did. They used tools that they found on the internet. They're not, compared to the staff I work with, they're not experts. They learned from YouTube videos how to do this. And this is the actual desktop. So all these on the black screen in the back, these are actual connections. When the police came to the apartment, you could actually see, well, this is that IP, that username in that organization. So this was live. So it's hard to say, I'm not involved. He made some, he actually accepted some of the accusations directly. And he's not a sophisticated hacker, I'll tell you that. But they are believed, it's believed that they got away with 250 million Swedish kronor. And that's a lot of money for a group of people. So these are the reasons to focus on protect, detect, and respond. And this session is about protection. But just some last words before we move into some demos on how you can build security. What used to be hackers working one by one are now turned into group, like the Khrushchev team of 8 people. That's a trend we see. 80% of all the cyber attacks are driven by organized crime rings today. So it's a new economy. The money has moved into computers. The criminals are following the money. This is a city I like to talk about a little bit. This is a city in Romania. It's believed that half of the population works in cybercrime. You know why? Again, picture yourself. All of you guys work in IT. Now, you're not working in IT anymore. You're now in that city that I can't even pronounce in Romania. And you now have 3 kids. And a wife or husband or whatever your preference is, depending on who you are. And then you make 200 euros a month. You can't pay for electricity. You can hardly pay for food for your kids. You're always in debt. Sometimes you actually steal things just to make ends meet. And now a cybercrime ring comes to you and says, you know what, you can work in the call center. You'll get 10 times the pay. You'll be able to put your kids in school, feed the family, buy for gas. It's going to be fine. That's what's happening in the poor parts of the world. So grandma and granddad are sitting in call centers making phony service calls trying to infect your computers. Developers are coding malware. And everyone is involved in making money fly away from the rich part of the world to their part of the world. They don't feel like criminals. They have a job. They have a monthly salary. They have vacations. And this is what we're facing today. So it's becoming an asymmetric threat. The entire world can hack me today. You don't have to protect yourself from, the bad neighborhood close to your home. You have to protect yourself from the world. And this is new. It didn't used to be like that. They have the best leased line in Romania. They can be in your house in 10 milliseconds, or at the office, or in your desktop at work. So what do we do? And this is where we're going to start talking about this. Well, we used to have an idea of if we only protect our systems, we've been talking for 10, 15 years about if we only do like patching, if we do hardening, if we do whatever, something good passwords, whatever, identities. I mean, we don't do good passwords yet. It takes some time to kind of understand what that means, but we're still working on it. But if we do all this stuff, segmentation, then it's going to be all good. It's kind of funny, these 700 corporations that got hit by Khrushchev and his team, potentially hit by them, he's not tried yet, or sentenced yet. He's tried but not sentenced. Well, they believed they had some kind of security. But yet it was so simple, they could just send an email, and then a few more, and then they could remote control their environment. So we need to assume breach. We need to have a vision or a picture in our head that says, sooner or later we'll have malware in our environment, and someone will do something bad. And I'm going to ask you a question, and be honest. I mean, no one's looking, okay? Everyone in this room that can cross their heart and say, no one in my organization was ever attacked by ransomware. No one had we did not have one single ransomware outbreak in any of my employees' or colleagues' computer over the last 2 years. Please raise your hand if you know that you did not have any experience in ransomware attacks. Look around. It's funny. I asked my customers, and we only work the bigger customers, the more enterprise customers and government agencies. I asked them all, did you have the ones I've been working in projects with this year? There are others that may not be hit. But I asked them all, did you have at least one single experience from ransomware? Everyone said yes. Everyone is hacked by ransomware. That translates to every single corporation that I have as a customer that I've been in project with this year have had some external party they don't know running code on at least one system in their environment. Do you know the statistics between ransomware attacks and targeted attacks that are not made to be seen. Do you think ransomware is more common than all the other targeted attacks all in all together? No, they're not. That translates into, if you had one ransomware attack, you probably also had at least one targeted attack. If you had 10, you may have had 15 targeted attacks that you didn't see. That's the reality. How do you feel about this? You feel good? Silent crowd. So, in the next session and the one after that, we're going to talk about detection and respond, because if something happens, you need to detect the things you did not manage to protect against. And if you detect it, you need to be able to do the right things so you can actually mitigate the threat. But those are for the next session. But this is where protection puts itself in this model. First, we bring up a barrier to make it difficult. And then when it doesn't work, we have other things we can do. So, how do you protect yourself? What do you do? There is a number of things that you can do, but I would love for you to focus on one thing. And that is, how do we build security that actually works? Because another frustration of mine is the fact that many of the clients I work with, they invest a lot in security. But many of them confuses security with compliancy. They feel like we are ISO this and that compliant. We are compliant with HIPAA, NIST, whatever this and that is. But when you work in compliance, you're usually trying to do as little as possible to get through the checks and balances of the requirements. When you work in security, you're trying to mitigate the threat. And they're not necessarily the same. They could be, but they're not. In my organizations, we have broken into more than 1,000 organizations in real pen testing exercises and red team exercises. We know that you can break in. And what we do there is simple. We find exposures in the server platform, or we find exposures using phishing and similar things to the user devices. Wireless, we walk into their environments, and we try to take ourselves from there to the internal systems. We try to go from there to compromise typically domain controllers or anything else that could be used to control the entire environment. And then we go for the high-value targets, just like the attackers. And we measure this. So what we understand is what would make a difference. What security controls, what actions could you do that would make a difference that is fit for everyone? And those are the ones we're going to focus on for the rest of this session. It is credential hygiene, like how do we make it so that someone can't just guess our passwords to Office 365? And more importantly, how can we make sure that people cannot move from here laterally all the way to high-value targets using credential dependencies? Same thing goes for privileges. Almost every time still today when we break into an environment, we get credentials, and we try to mount to share with information inside the organization. We usually get access to basically every document they have, no matter who we are. So we still haven't fixed those today. Network segmentation, of course, all the traditional patching, other kinds of system health. So we're going to switch over to some demos to inspire you with things that you can do that's in the box of Windows in order to create more security. And this is where the wolf comes in.
Good, thank you. So we know that the major success factor for attackers to take over an environment is the lateral movement. And then lateral movement means they need to have credentials. They need to have mean of managing the systems, getting hold of those systems, and then getting admin privs inside those systems, and extracting even more information and getting that to the next step, to the next system, etc. So let's have a look at the latest functionality that made available in Active Directory 2016 and what that does for preventing the lateral movement or preventing the attackers from being able to conduct such activities. So let's start with that one. So I will, this is one client, CLI2. I will just try to access this system using an admin account. The admin 01. Sorry.
Two good passwords, my friend.
No, the keyboard layout.
Yeah, there's always someone else, right?
Yeah. So the password is actually pretty simple. But the keyboard is not that very simple. So anyhow, I mean, if you look at your environment today, I can probably guarantee that most of you can step up to any computer and just perform a domain admin logon. Right? That's the default setting. By default, the system allows domain admin to access any computer in the environment, which is quite handy. It's quite nice. You can do whatever if you're domain admin. That's part of the problem as well. We're getting to that. But this system is now configured not to allow this user to access. I know the password for this user, but I tried to log on to access the system. It says, hey, your account is configured to prevent you from performing this type of access. This machine is not yours. You're not allowed to perform the logon, even though you have the password. So let's try the same thing on another machine. This is CLI1. Here we go. If I go ahead and sign out from here, and just perform a sign in with that admin 01 guy. Still the same password, it's just a different machine. As a matter of fact, that admin 01 guy is only allowed to perform an interactive logon, starting his or her journey into that environment from this machine. If you step up to anything else, it doesn't matter if there's a network connection you're performing or an interactive sign-in you're performing, you will not be allowed, and that's by Active Directory policies. It's not locally configured on this machine. You cannot bypass it on this machine. You have to control Active Directory to be able to bypass this particular feature.
It's kind of funny. It looks like such a trivial feature, but the normal time it takes from the first intrusion of one computer to compromise an entire domain, impersonating a domain admin, today is between 24 and 48 hours. By just restricting admin logons to only domain controllers, you could change that number immensely with one simple activity that most people don't do still. So that's why this is an important but simple demo.
This is what we call authentication policies and authentication policy silos in Active Directory 2012 R2. You simply bind different entities together, says this user account and that computer belongs to each other. Whatever you need to perform in terms of getting your tickets, your TGTs, etc., you can do that on that machine, and from there you have fully fluent single sign-on to anything else in your environment. So this way, the attacker has to control this particular machine to be able to conduct any type of lateral movement using that account. I can basically give them the password and be 100% confident that they are not getting anywhere with that password unless they have this particular hardware as well. So that one of the things we can rely on to prevent that type of activities and starting putting some trouble in their path so they are not getting away with that type of activities. This is a built-in feature, as you understand, and it's free to use, so just if you have your Active Directory running 2012 R2, just go ahead and configure that. Another very nice feature, if we keep speaking about those admin privs and going a little bit towards the least priv model, so we all know that we need to have admin privileges to manage different systems, right? And it's very convenient if I'm server admin, domain admin for a while, maybe in most of the cases for a very long while, like you start your career and then you evolve somehow into becoming that admin and you got that domain admin priv, and once you get that priv, you don't want to give it away, right? You don't want to give it up. It's very convenient to have that. So what if we can have that assigned on time basis? Like if I check the members right now in the domain admin group and this Active Directory setup, I have the built-in user. I do have an RMS services user for other reasons. So these are the two static members in that group. So what if I go ahead and add another member, add a group member, to the domain admin group. That's the admin 01 guy. And I do that on a time-limited basis. So I'm adding a time to live value to this and making that somebody member of that Active Directory group. So let's get that group again. These are the current members of that group. I see the admin 01 is apparently considered to be a member of that group, but there is a time parameter involved in this. And if I just do another get, you see the difference in seconds. It's actually counting down. So the TTL value is set to 30 minutes, and this is how much seconds are left. If I go to any machine where I'm allowed to log in using that account, I will have domain admin privs.
It's all about limiting exposure of high privs. And again, it's a simple feature, but I see a lot of customers investing lots and lots of money in solutions that can do this for you. And most of them don't realize that this is already built in. So I think it's much easier to make your own scripts or maybe buy into some simple fancy UI for this built-in function. It's more robust also. So it's another thing with Windows. There are so many features in there, but you need them to be presented to you in order to know they're there. It's just so much. So that's the whole idea of the rest of this session, to bring up some of these features and inspire you. If you install one of them, you have improved security.
So I'm just making sure that I signed off properly from this session, and then redoing the sign-in procedure. Just checking my privileges. And it clearly says I'm part of the domain admin group, right? And this is for the time being, the whatever number of seconds are left since I started or initiated that time-based membership. So this is actually perfectly reflected in the whole identity ecosystem, the whole authentication ecosystem in the Windows platform. So if I look at my Kerberos tickets, you see the start and the end time. That's not the classic 10 hours TGT or TGSs I'm getting when I do regular logons now. This is now limited to the minimum TTL value I have in my user account, which is whatever left in the number of seconds. So when this expires, I need to get new tickets. Whenever I do that, the new ticket will not give me the domain admin privs anymore. So that's a perfect way to limit the exposure of very high privs in our environment. We can deal with that. You need to have that very high privilege to do your work, but we can use that model to define a time-based assignment for you. This is another feature that is built in. It requires Active Directory 2016. So you have to step up your Active Directory to 2016 level. This comes built in. So you just enable that additional feature, and then we go ahead with that one. Once again, no additional requirements in licensing or any additional costs you need to pay. Another very nice thing with this, this is called Privilege Access Management in Active Directory. The feature is the Privilege Access Management feature. So another part in this is something that is called shadow privileges. We're not going to demo that, but the shadow privileges are simply the ability to set up another forest in your environment where you actually have the running admin accounts and admin groups. And whomever looks into your Active Directory, they will only see empty groups in your Active Directory system. So if I just have a look at that, that setup, we actually have a similar setup to that one I can demo for you. Anything you want to add in, Marcus?
No, you're good. I think you got this.
Thank you. So let me just let's just remind ourselves of the groups. I'm only the domain admin right now. Let me just show you another similar feature. So this time I'm going to use Smart Card Logon because it's very handy. I'm going to use the virtual smart card feature, which is built in since the Windows 8 release, the Windows Server 2012. We do have that in the platform since a couple of releases back in time.
So what is that really? Can you explain it?
It's using your TPM chip to perform smart card behavior and smart card logon events. So the TPM becomes your smart card, basically.
So the computer basically becomes a smart card. You don't need to have it in your pocket.
Yes, that's your second factor. The second factor is this device by itself. So unless you have access to this physical device, you'll not be able to perform this logon. That's another way to limit the exposure of those very delicate admin privs, right? So we can perform this in our environment and make sure that the important people managing important things have to do it certain ways. So let's go to PowerShell. Once again, I do the whoami/groups. This time, I do actually have another group in my group member. This is still the same admin01 guy logging in. Because I'm performing a logon using this smart card, because there is a specific attribute in that certificate, I'm actually having a dynamic membership assigned at the time of logon to that security group in Active Directory.
Think about this for a second, really. And if you were doing the investigations I do, you would understand the importance for sure. What you're doing is you have a username or user account with a password. If you want to do trivial things, you can use the password. It's fine. But if you're going to do some admin stuff, then we have made a connection between this group membership and the template that issued that smart card. So you can have a domain admin template that will issue smart cards, and then you have the built-in domain admin access only when you log on using your smart card. And if I'm the attacker, I really need to be into your session. So if you get your credentials stolen, I cannot use those credentials from anywhere else than your own computer. So now you only have to secure maybe 4 or 6 computers in order to protect domain compromise. It's such a big impact. It's built into Windows. You don't need to buy additional hardware if you only have TPM 1.2, which is built into basically every modern laptop today. And it's there for the taking. No extra money. Just some extra enthusiasm about security, if you will.
And once again, we really need to rely on the fact, like for this feature and for the shadow principal feature, they do share the same fact about if an attacker is in your environment, they will be blind in terms of figuring out who the important guys are. They're looking at these groups are empty. They know that these are the groups to look for. There are some users going to be members of that group, but this group is empty always, all time. So they won't be able to perform their activities in terms of laying out the structure of your systems, targeting the right people, etc.
Yeah, even our team would have a problem with that. The first thing we do when we do an APT or a red team exercise, as soon as we get one username password combination, we connect to the domain and we extract all the Active Directory data that we can. All the group memberships are readable to any user in the domain. So we quickly identify what people are in what groups. And then we quickly identify what are all the different attributes to the users. Are there anyone that has a description of admins and things like that? If we only had customers doing this, it would be such a big problem. We need access to these groups, but there are no members.
Let's take a look at another thing that is also another success factor why lateral movement is so easy to perform by attackers. So this is the built-in admin account in my machine. This is the local machine's built-in admin account, right? So in many environments, we do, as a matter of fact, have a situation where the built-in admin accounts in multiple machines do share the same password across these machines. So if I can extract that password from one machine, it's most of the times just go ahead and connect to the second machine in line and reuse the same user account and password, and there you go, you're managing that machine as well. That's typical lateral movement activity. So by looking at the local admin account, extracting that and reusing it, passing the hash or whatever type of activity you would like to prefer to call it, I can manage another machine and another one until I reach a high-value target of some sort. There is a help desk individual logged in here, somebody with more privileges, a domain admin maybe, etc., and then I go ahead and start extracting those credentials. And then perform the second phase of the more privileged lateral movement attacks. So as you see here, this password was apparently set yesterday. If we revisit this approximately that time of the day today, 2:50 p.m., we will see the password change again today because I have a policy to do so. This is the local password admin system introduced by Microsoft as an extension, group policy extension for all supported Windows versions today. So you can, by a policy, tell it to change, set a randomly selected unique password for every local admin account on your machines, and those passwords will be available for you in Active Directory. So it's just a matter of going to and using your tools to get those passwords.
If you have the right credentials.
If you have the right credentials, I can just tell it, hey, CLI1, please give me that password. You can, of course, for those of you more working with PowerShell, you can do that in PowerShell as well. So you can delegate that permission to get that password to whomever is interesting or needs to have that password. So your task will be changed a little bit from having that well-known password to I have to go to Active Directory first, acquire the password, and then reuse on that particular machine.
Yeah, and also you have some kind of management over password over time. You can't just take passwords and put them in logins or in different scripts and stuff. They will be invalidated the next day. So that's typically another thing we do. We find a file share, we parse the entire share for old scripts and things and look if there are any old passwords there. And normally you find at least some scripts, usually deployment scripts and similar, that has a username password combination that can run code on basically every system in your file share. So if you have a strategy and apply these different tools, then that's not going to happen anymore. Even though you have them there, they're not going to be valid. So you can actually clean everything up by just making them outdated.
And then you can actually hand over this password to the regular user using that machine if they need to install anything or requires admin privs. They will have it for a limited time. You can set a new expiration date as you go. And we don't have that trouble with somebody having a common password to manage different machines. This is applicable for servers as well. So please use this not only for your workstations, but for your servers as well. And then you can hand over this password to your consultants or whomever helping you out with managing those servers. Once again, this is an add-on which is freely available, so you just go ahead and download those components and configure that on your systems. Continuing with the credential hygiene components, let's have another look. Let's start the terminal services client, and I would start the terminal services client in a certain way. So I'm starting the terminal services client with a parameter that says remote guard. The remote credential guard feature, this is part of Windows 10, Windows Server 2016. And I'm connecting to CLI1. Okay. Anybody notice any differences from the way you're used to using the Microsoft Terminal Services client? No logon prompt, right? There is no give me your credentials. I need your credentials to access this machine. It's actually performing a single sign-on, which is a very good sign per se, because single sign-on means I'm not giving away my credentials. The server, the receiving party in here, that system doesn't have my credentials in clear text. It will never get them. But I'm accessing that system perfectly and performing a single sign-on, and here we go. I'm now logged in with the domain admin account, the built-in domain admin, as a matter of fact, in this session. So let's have a look at what kind of artifacts we could have in this system. Let me just fix the font for you. This is where you should start dancing or something.
Way cool. Wow. Amazing demo.
Yeah. So I will use Mimikatz. What else?
Yeah, Mimikatz is a very known tool to extract secrets from the LSA, Local Security Authority subsystem, where you can get password hashes, sometimes clear text passwords and things like that, depending on configuration.
Many of you have probably seen that many times before. So let's have a look at our domain admin session. This is the thing we're looking at. So this is the session I just initiated with the domain admin. This is the built-in administrator account in Active Directory. And if you look carefully here, unlike the other credential artifacts we have for other accounts having a session in here, I don't have the NT hash present in this session.
Yeah. So just so that you really understand this, some of you already know this, but for the others, if you have the NT hash, then you can use that to authenticate the remote system. That is the password equivalent. By just making your admins use this feature, they will not expose that hash on every system they interactively log on to. Another simple solution, if you can enforce that in your organization, then you take away the problem. There would be no keys lying around on different systems just because your admins interactively logged on. So there are so many different ways we can mitigate this problem today. That is the reason for threat actors being able to take a complete infrastructure control in 24 to 48 hours by just changing this behavior.
So I do have fully fluent single sign-on capabilities in this session. This means I can access any other services that you can imagine or think of. There are no limits in here. I'm the domain admin. I can access anything else with single sign-on. But my credentials are not here to be collected by an attacker. So of course the attacker can collect a service ticket that is valid for a limited time. We probably giving that away, or that's a risk we need to understand. It's always there. We cannot get rid of it. If anybody controlling that machine, they can do whatever I can do within this session. So I have to be careful on that side. But I'm not giving away the credentials per se. So they are bound to my existence in this session. So the time I disconnect this session, all my credentials, all the tickets will actually disappear from this session. Unlike a regular remote desktop session, if you disconnect a regular remote desktop session, you're not signing out, you're just disconnecting, your credentials will still be living inside. If I disconnect a remote guard session, my credentials will vanish. They are not there anymore. There are no valid tickets. Everything will be removed. If I reconnect again, everything will be reestablished. That's a big difference between regular RDP sessions with single sign-on and remote guard sessions. This is actually the same technology that we have in the credential guard component and the device guard setup. But instead of relying on a hypervisor and doing the two containers, you've seen all these pictures and slides probably too many times. So instead of having that tiny secure container holding your credentials and everything that is of high importance, the client, the RDP client, is the secure container. That's where I have my credentials, and that's where everything is starting. So if I disconnect the session, that container disappears. There are nothing to be collected after that. So just be aware of that. There is another technology that was made available before the Windows 10, Windows 20 Server release, 16 release, that is related to the remote desktop, which is the restricted admin mode in remote desktop. That one requires you to be local admin. This one doesn't. So there are some differences. This one binds you to Kerberos only. That one doesn't necessarily do so. In the restricted admin mode, you will be impersonating the local machine account, etc. So there are some built-in differences. This is better ways to use that, better ways to utilize that type of protection. Cool. So another thing that is very important to look at is that if somebody cannot actually access your machine, if somebody cannot connect to your machine, they won't be able to misuse any credentials they collected anywhere. if this machine doesn't accept any network connections from anybody on the network, maybe unless you're coming from very specific sources, etc. So having the local firewall running is one of these measures we use to recommend. So your local firewall should be switched on. Your local firewall should be very restrictive when it comes to admin access. So that's something you guys need to work on enabling. We've done multiple demos on that one, I guess.
Yeah.
Just go to channel 9 and check any of that, or I know that a lot of Microsoft people are doing the same type of demos nowadays. So let's go ahead and start looking at another component. PowerShell is obviously arising. Question?
You're basically going to have to cry out what you're trying to say, otherwise we can't hear you. And I will repeat the question. Sure. Is it possible to enforce remote guard? That's the question.
There are policies to be used, yes. So you can tell this is your client has to behave certain ways, and the receiving system has to behave certain ways. You can actually require it on the receiving side and on the client as well. So this is a credential delegation. You can tell I explicitly allow only remote credential guard and no other types of signing in to a remote desktop.
It's a good question, and it's a very good way of making it happen, of course. Use the force.
As said, we're starting to look into the PowerShell scenario. Microsoft wants us to use even more PowerShell than we're using today. As a matter of fact, the Project Honolulu, some of you has looked at that, I guess. The Project Honolulu is the type of the next server management project Microsoft is working on. That's PowerShell only, PowerShell by proxying, etc. So for those of you going to be running core servers, any other type of flavors of Windows Server without a GUI, PowerShell will be your only way forward to manage those servers. And PowerShell should be protected very much better than we're doing today. So if I just go ahead and connect to CLI1, enter PS session, I'm obviously the domain admin, almighty, I can do whatever I imagine of, so just get command, I don't have any restrictions in here. This is all PowerShell can offer me right now, okay? Nothing strange about this. So let me just exit that session and do it a little bit differently. So I will connect to that same machine, but I will connect with a specific configuration name I call GIA in this case. You see where I'm going? Those of you who've heard about the GIA, just enough administration component or setup in PowerShell, this is a simple demo about that. So I'm connecting to the same machine with the same privileges, but to a different endpoint. That different endpoint gives me a little bit limitations. Okay, this is not everything PowerShell can offer me, right? Out of the box. But this is defined in that endpoint. That endpoint says whomever connects, they will only be able to do these things.
Yeah, compare that to the previous result.
Yeah, I mean, that's everything, all the commandlets, all the functions, all the features in PowerShell. So this is a new way to start looking at the least privilege model. You connect to the GIA endpoint as a regular user. We will make some commands and commandlets available for you, but not everything. So if I try to do ipconfig, it will says, well, ipconfig is unknown, whilst GP result is obviously something I can run in that session.
So you basically have an administrative function firewall for PowerShell. So you can say these group of admins are trusted to do these particular functions, and those functions only. So if you create roles, and you have the mapping task that they're supposed to be able to do, then you can harden and secure everything else. So by taking on this technology, you change the attack surface immensely.
So this gives us another thing. As said, you can connect as a regular user, number one, so you don't need to have admin privs on that destination machine. Sorry for that. I need to step in that folder. Nope.
It's the keyboard.
Yeah, it is the keyboard. We always blame the keyboard. Sorry. So another thing it gives me, it actually gives me the ability to monitor everything going on in that remote PowerShell session. So this is PowerShell transcript logging we're looking at. Let me just give you a better view of this. So it says, hey, there was a user called administrator connecting. And by the way, whatever executes on this local machine is not being executing by that admin, who happens to be the domain admin account. It's executing by a virtual account with privileges needed, required for this action. So once again, I don't need to be an admin to use this. I can just use it as a regular user. Whatever requires in terms of admin privs, the system, the subsystem will utilize that for me and will give me the ability to perform actions that requires local admin privs. This is built into the PowerShell framework. This is the PowerShell runtime that does that for me. In addition to that, because this is a transcript logging, I see whatever happens on that command prompt, on that remote session. Okay, somebody did the get command, and they got this result. So this is as if I'm sitting there. This is a transcript. This is an over-the-shoulder logging. Fully fluent audit capabilities to this. So whatever happens, I will get all these results. As you see, I'm looking at what's happening on that command line.
This is not just for admins as users. This is a typical function that is very valuable now in the future automation. When you have a service account that does things automatically, you can ensure that it is only allowed to do certain things. So that way, if someone steals that account, it won't have all the access that can improve the chance of making a real good breach. So one other thing that we always do in the red team exercises, and this is the mapping to the reality, whenever we enter a machine, we take all the service accounts and we try to connect to different resources that we already know that we can connect to because of the memberships in Active Directory groups and things. So this way you can limit those. If you use PowerShell, GEA, and service accounts correctly, you can go for automation without being afraid of losing high privs.
Another very important thing to look at, PowerShell is very heavily misused by attackers or used by attackers for their favor, obviously. This is simply because PowerShell gives you unlimited power. If you execute PowerShell standard in any Windows machine today, you will get something called full language mode, which allows you to use whatever built in PowerShell, as well as extending the functionality in PowerShell in terms of using the whole .NET framework available, etc. So this is heavily used. The attackers heavily rely on this fact to extend PowerShell and use that as a built-in tool to attack systems. They're not drawing any attention to anything of that. You can configure your system such a way to put them in constrained language mode, which simply means you can use whatever built in, nothing else. So unless you're whitelisted, explicitly whitelisted, allowed to do so, you cannot use any of the advanced features in PowerShell. You cannot extend the language. In this particular case, I'm having just a simple whitelist using BitLocker. So let me just, on this particular machine. So this is my application policies, AppLocker policies. I have a script rule that says, hey, everything located in the Windows and the program file folder, please go ahead and allow that to run. But anything I have, obviously, I need to run Mimikatz. So I have my files folder also allowed to be able to run. Other things, otherwise, nothing else is possible to execute with full language mode, full language power in PowerShell. The same thing applies for my applications. This is as well a recommendation to start working with AppLocker this way. So just put together those built-in policies to do a very simplified whitelisting model. You will probably get rid of a whole lot of things, including some ransomware probably, just by putting together these simple rules in place. You can use app locker, obviously, for audit purposes, so you don't enforce the rules, you just go ahead in audit mode. This is something we can control in the policies, so just use, instead of enforcing the rules, we can do the audit mode only. So you will get every click, every double click, everything that is executing on your machine logged. And it's compared to that rule base. It says this is, according to the rule base, this should be okay. According to the rule base, this is not okay. And then you can start collecting those not okay logs and investigating more on that one, on looking more on that. So a final demo, I guess we need to do here. Let me see. Basically, just to enable the credential guard, application guard, I guess you guys will be doing that as well. Or do we have the time? No.
Of course, we have all the time in the world, 3 minutes.
Yeah. It's the GP edit, and I need to run this as an admin just to show you the easiness of enabling the credential guard component, which is then the local protection for any credentials on this machine. So we go to the, admin templates.
Well, I think why you do that, I think it's interesting to understand. We filed a report to Microsoft about passing the hash problems in the early 2000s. We had our own tools. They were called GSIG dump. We had LSL, SAS, MSVCTL. We had a lot of different tools for stealing and doing pass-through-the-hash attacks. And they said it's not a vulnerability because they said it's by design at the time. Now it all changed. This has become the #1 reason for lateral movement that takes you from the small attack to complete compromise and high-value target attacks. So if you only do these things, then you're protected. And now, in Windows 10, you have all the ultimate features that really mitigates this threat, because now it's recognized. Credential Guard is the last and maybe simplest one if you get it to work.
Yeah.
Because then you're not storing any hashes anymore. They're stored in a virtual machine outside the normal operating system experience.
So if you have the requirements for device guard, credential guard is a subsystem for device guard. So you have a system running, secure firmware, FE boot, secure boot, etc. You have a TPM, that's a preferred model. You can run without TPM, but TPM is the way to go if you want to bring the security to its maximum level. TPM 2.0, specifically speaking, if you want to get hold of device health attestation, so the TPM will be the witness to ask how this device is doing. The TPM will tell you what it's been observing, and then we'll report it back to you with digital signatures, etc. So you can use Intune or System Center to manage that. So let me just quickly enable this, and all it takes, set the policy, restart the machine, and device guard is up and running. So restart it anyway.
Yeah. And that's basically all you need to do.
Yes.
So I think we're running out of time. This session is not the sexiest one. It's about building security. I know a lot of people like to watch the hacking demos and stuff. I want to promote the 2 following sessions. We have 1 at 2 o'clock, 2 to 3. Then we're going to talk about the detection. So we're going to do some different attacks, and then we're going to discuss how you can detect them in your environment, what tools and strategies you need in order to have good detection. We're going to have 1 session, 5:30 to 3:30 to 4:30. That's going to be about response. We're actually going to walk you through a real attack and then do the response live with the response tools and show you what you can do. And most of it with free-to-use tools, because we see that people don't have detect and response capabilities really, but we're going to cover that in those sessions. So I hope that you learned something about the new features in Windows 10 and security. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And if you want to have the slides and other material, this is actually recorded. Just make sure to go there. Or if you prefer a QR tag, that's the QR tag for that URL.